Allen Company, 47 years young and a proud sponsor, wishes OOIDA all the best as you celebrate 50 years.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Redding.
It's the 88th anniversary of Babe Ruth's final home run, and this is Landline Now. The good news, we may have hit the bottom with regard to spot rates. The bad news, we may be stuck there for a while. Andrew King of the OOIDA Foundation stops by to talk about what the spot market numbers and trends are telling us with advice on weathering the storm. Congress has said no to a new emission rule for large trucks from the Environmental Protection Agency. So what happens now? I'll discuss that, plus the latest efforts to require underride guards with OOIDA Director of Federal Affairs, Jay Grimes. And finally, a new law in Washington state ensures that truckers will have access to restrooms at shippers and receivers there. Meanwhile, Utah's legislature has been called into a special session to deal with road maintenance needs. Scott Thompson gets the details on both from our state legislative expert, Keith Goebel. But first, today's headlines. A group of U.S. senators openly call on EPA to rescind its new heavy-duty truck emission standards. Another city just banned overnight truck parking. And we'll tell you where the cops just busted up an alleged diesel theft ring. And now, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. Our top story today. More than 24 U.S. senators are calling on the EPA to scrap new emission standards for heavy-duty trucks. It comes in the form of a letter to EPA Administrator Michael Regan. In it, Senator Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia, ranking member of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, and 26 of her Republican colleagues said the proposal effectively mandates a costly transition to electric vehicles, all without congressional approval. The EPA's final rule is already in effect, but doesn't take effect until model year 2027 trucks start rolling out. When they do, the American Truck Dealers Association estimates the technology needed to meet the new standards will cost up to $42,000 per truck. The letter penned by Senator Capito cites other concerns as well, like the strain the new rules will put on the power grid, the lack of charging infrastructure, and safety concerns related to the added weight of electric trucks. It's the latest chapter in Congress's attempts to overturn the new rules. The House this week passed a resolution that would nullify them, joining their colleagues in the Senate. In a floor speech, Representative Bill Johnson of Ohio expressed concerns that the new EPA rules would have a devastating effect on truckers, in particular, small business truckers.
96% of the trucking industry is small operators, is small fleet companies. 96%. They are the ones that are the least able to go out and buy this new technology. And they are the ones that are going to more quickly go under and go out of business because of this onerous rule.
Senator Deb Fischer of Nebraska is one of the 26 senators who signed the letter to the EPA. She led the way on the resolution that passed through the Senate first and then the House. In a conversation with Landline earlier this month, Senator Fischer outlined her biggest concerns.
It's pretty ironic that EPA would put out this emissions standard that wouldn't solve the problem that they think seems to exist out there, because truckers, they're going to drive their older trucks longer than they usually would. It's not just truckers that this would affect. Obviously, they are on the front line. They have to assume all those costs. But it's consumers. Everything that you buy, it's going to cost more to the end consumer. And anybody that ships on a truck, it's going to cost them more. So ag producers, that's going to cost ag producers more, which then adds on to the cost of the store. It's going to cost manufacturers more because it costs truckers more. So, it's just to act like there's no cost to this is not true.
The resolution that passed the House this week now heads to the desk of President Biden, who's already said he would veto it. The second of the Twin Cities is putting restrictions on truck parking. By a count of 7-0, the St. Paul, Minnesota City Council on Wednesday voted in favor of an overnight truck parking ban for city streets. Vehicles weighing 26,000 pounds or more are prohibited from parking on any St. Paul city street unless the vehicle is loading or unloading. Enforcement begins on January 1st, when fines will start out at $150, then increase to $250 starting the following summer. The St. Paul ordinance mirrors one passed by the Minneapolis City Council 2 years ago. The Minnesota Trucking Association was among those strongly opposing the ordinance. In a statement, the association's president said it will reduce overall efficiency and cut into available driving hours for truck drivers who are going to be forced to park outside of St. Paul. Navistar is recalling thousands of international trucks of various models due to an issue with the backup lights. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration says more than 4,000 vehicles are affected. They include the International 9100i trucks of various model years, plus International ProStar and International RH trucks. NHTSA says the backup lights offer low visibility when the vehicle is in reverse and bobtail mode. They also have not been equipped with additional unobstructed backup lights in violation of federal standards. For more information about the recall notice and those affected model years, we've got a link at landlinenow.com. Texas authorities just busted up an alleged diesel theft operation. 16 people have now been charged in connection to the case. The Texas Financial Crimes Intelligence Center claims that between February and October of last year, the suspects stole more than 100,000 gallons of diesel from fuel stations in the Houston area. Authorities say they manipulated the system on pumps that measures the amount of fuel being dispersed to show significantly smaller purchases than what was actually dispensed. Then they allegedly sold the stolen fuel to truck drivers at a discounted rate. The 16 suspects are facing first-degree felony charges. 8 have so far been arrested. If convicted, they face up to 99 years in prison. Folks in Pennsylvania who have been banned from holding a CDL could be getting a second chance. A bill that passed out of the House Transportation Committee this week would give people who had their commercial driver's licenses suspended for life because of a drunk driving conviction or other offense a chance at reinstatement. Instead of a lifetime ban, they'd be able to reapply after 10 years. Pennsylvania's CDL disqualification laws are stricter than federal regulations. While federal regulations have 1 and 3 year suspension periods, Pennsylvania can impose a lifetime ban for some offenses. That bill now heads to the House floor for a vote. The American Truck Historical Society will soon host its national convention and truck show. Landline Now's Ashley Blackford has the details.
ATHS will host its annual convention and truck show from June 8th to the 10th. This year's event will take place in Reno, Nevada. David Schnautz is the first vice president and the convention committee chairman for ATHS. He says they've got close to 700 trucks signed up and almost 1,400 people expected to attend.
Our National Convention and Truck Show is something that we have every year. It's moved around to various locations. Of course, it's our convention, so we have a meeting there, a board meeting. But the most of the fun is the truck show and the vendors. We've always had a truck show associated with it. It seems to get bigger every year. Vendors, they're kind of new to us. We started that just a few short years ago, and now we're up to over 30 vendors for this show in Reno.
For more information on the show, you can visit aths.org. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford.
Thanks, Ashley. And finally, several dozen new truck parking spaces were just added to southeastern California. Travel Centers of America recently opened up a new TA Express location in Olancha, just off U.S. Highway 395. It's got 60 truck parking spaces, 5 diesel bays, and all the other amenities you'd expect at a TA truck stop. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. Do you have a news tip? Maybe you have a comment about something you heard on the air. Email us at landlinenow@ooida.com. Next, Scott Thompson gets an update on freight market conditions from Andrew King of the OOIDA Foundation. I'll discuss congressional action against an EPA rule for trucks with OOIDA Director of Federal Affairs Jay Grimes, and we'll hear about the new restroom access law in Washington state from state expert Keith Goebel. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
You trust PrePass for more bypasses? Now let PrePass help with tolls. PrePass toll service means lower cost, one invoice for all tolls, and fewer violations. Created by truckers for truckers. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
Since you started, What you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Every make, every model, in every corner of the country. Technical smarts and quality parts. That's how we roll. Bring your rig into TA Truck Service.
Welcome back to the program. We've been looking for silver linings when it comes to the spot market for quite a while now, and Andrew King of the OOIDA Foundation is going to tell us if he's found any since the last time we talked. Andrew puts the Foundation's monthly market update report together, and he joins us now. Andrew, always the bearer of real news. I don't know how to put it.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you for being here. It is always good to talk to you because, as we've said before, not necessarily the best news, a lot of this, but it is important, and it helps us put things into perspective here as we look at the big picture. I ran into you in the hall the other day. I asked you how things were looking on the spot market, and you kind of stood there for a little while. You took a long time to answer, and I'm not even sure if I got the answer there. So
it was more of a sound.
Yeah, and I mean, the fact that you're left speechless with what you're seeing out there is not encouraging. But I'll just ask you generally here. I mean, things are kind of looking how they've been looking for the past several months.
Yeah, it hasn't changed, unfortunately. And like we stated last time we talked, the hope was around Memorial Day that there would be a change in rates. And if so, then that could spell some like a new cycle coming in, and perhaps the next quarter or later in the year things would kind of turn around, but things have not picked up. And in fact, even flatbed, which was the lone like bright spot, I mean, even it wasn't like as great as we would like it to be, obviously, but even it has dropped some as well. So there are still some signs that are somewhat encouraging that we'll get into, but we're bouncing along the bottom is how it's being phrased.
Bouncing along the bottom.
Yeah.
All right. Overall spot rates here, as you look at the numbers and you look at comparisons to the previous month and the year before and so on and so forth, I mean, they're obviously down. Are they at least remaining stable at this point, month on month and year on year, or what are you seeing there that kind of stands out to you?
They're mostly staying close to like 2019 levels. I think that's kind of the commonality between the three different trailer types that we talk about, starting with a van, the load to truck ratios, which we get from DAT, decrease 7.3%. Month over month to 1.9. So that's saying that there's 1.9 loads, or about 2, for every truck, which is quite a bit different than where it was a year ago. It's 44% lower than what it was last year. And a lot of that is not necessarily, that's the thing about load to truck ratio. You don't know exactly what's driving it by just looking at it. It could be there's not enough loads, or there's way too many trucks, or what have you. But what we are seeing is that actually even both are kind of dropping. Van loads, which would indicate, more the demand, and then the number of equipment posts is the supply side. And that is, supply is up and demand is down. So that gets you a kind of a steep drop over the last several months.
You said something there, and we talked earlier about perspective and trying to have some. Again, when you're in the middle of the storm, it's not as easy to do that.
Right.
But you mentioned 2019 levels that were trending kind of in that area, right?
Yeah.
Before the pandemic, before things kind of went through the roof. I guess my question, and this may be hard to answer, is this kind of where we're going to live for a while? I don't think we're going to get back to the pandemic levels that we saw necessarily, but are we going to be in this, kind of world here for a while?
It seems like it for the time being, which is kind of rough considering the cost of operations and things of that nature. But yeah, it's looking like we're going to just kind of ride this wave. It might take a while before, really what we're looking for is capacity to kind of shift and that could help bring on the new freight cycle. And of course, that means though that some people will be either out of business or maybe they change their business model. But until that happens, it seems like we're just kind of going steady. I mean, it's going down, but it is finding somewhat of a bottom, which is a plus thing. But the other thing to worry about is as fuel decreases, which you wouldn't think that would be an issue. You'd be like, yeah, that's great. But you'll also find that fuel surcharges are not as good, and the underlying base rate that's going on in your rates has actually been dropping to make room for the higher fuel surcharge. So it's going to be a difficult year, unfortunately, I think.
Yeah, it's looking more and more like that. Again, we were kind of hoping that things would take a turn here and that we had seen the bottom, perhaps in the spring.
Yeah.
We think maybe, it sounds like you think, and you talked about bouncing along the bottom.
Yeah.
Maybe we're at the bottom now. The problem is that the bottom looks like it's going to continue on for quite a while.
It'll be steady or at this low rate. It might potentially see a bump. This is usually when things start to increase. Produce season has a lot to do with that. As it takes up capacity from the refrigerated trailers, that helps in van, actually, because they kind of run hand in hand. Obviously, when produce season isn't booming, someone who's running a reefer can also haul van loads, and so that kind of sucks up some of the capacity. So there is some potential that maybe that turns around, but and the other thing that's really troubling as we get into van spot and contract rates, the spot rate for van has decreased 10 cents per mile month over month, and it's dropped 73 cents per mile since the last year. And the figures I'm giving right now include a fuel surcharge, which is important to know. And then for contract rates, they also decreased, which is actually in a way a good thing. It might sound strange, but the thing is we're wanting that spread between the two to counterbalance, to inverse, to go back the other way. Right. But right now it actually grew, and now there's a 59 cents per mile difference between contract and spot. And as long as that continues in its trajectory, they'll just both kind of be pulling each other down without there being something that pushes it back up.
Is there anything, and again, you, for lack of a better term, are swimming in numbers. I mean, you're looking at these numbers every single day, which explains why you're not exactly enthusiastic about all of this, because it is rather it's kind of a downer, honestly. But the fact that you're looking at these numbers, I mean, do you see anything in there? We keep looking for these silver linings. Do you see anything in there that kind of makes you think, okay, this is one thing that maybe we can build off of here?
Yeah, there's a couple things to keep in mind when you're looking at wholesale trade. Well, at least for furniture and appliances. Now, when you look at retail, that's different, as we've talked about the difference between the two. Wholesale trade for furniture and appliance sectors actually had some good positive signs last month. Ratios, inventory to sale ratios declined and sales went up, and that's a good sign. Obviously, it's just 1 month, so it takes a lot more than that to kind of form a trend, but that is a positive sign when it comes to like the van sector. When it comes to reefer sector, there is some encouraging signs that produce season is starting to pick up, actually, where it was kind of delayed, as we talked about before, because of all the rains and things going on in California. And California is a huge supplier of the nation's produce. And so as that started to pick up, in fact, the previous month it saw an increase of like 93% in volumes, which is a big number. I mean, it's almost twice or double. The problem, though, is it's still like 60 some odd % lower than where it was last year, but it's starting to pick up. Florida has been doing pretty well. You had Mother's Day and you had flowers that come in through Miami. But Florida itself won't be enough to pick up the whole produce market in general, the reefer market. We really need California to perform, so hopefully that will come into swing. So maybe we still have a little bit of a delayed produce season, and if that occurs, then that will prop up rates a bit. I don't know how much that will be. Usually there's a bit of a bump, quite a bit of a bump in the reefer market between now and July 4th of July.
Sure.
And right now, I'm not sure if that's going to materialize or not. One thing that DAT does provide, which can be helpful, is they do a 35-day forecast out, projecting where rates could be, and they run different models with different factors included in them just to see if they're in agreement or not. And almost all of them for van and flat and reefer have, about 10 cents or so that they're seeing that'll pick up 10 cents. And that's the base rate. So that's not including the fuel surcharge.
Right.
Between now and the middle of June. I'm kind of pessimistic on that. I don't know if that'll really materialize because I think they're just kind of clinging to seasonality because that's what normally happens around this time.
Right.
But I'm not sure if we're actually going to see that or not.
We're not living in normal times, I think, is the thing. And
Yeah.
when you try to predict where things are headed, you obviously
hard.
can look at trends, but considering that we just came out of the pandemic and those trends
Right.
were thrown out the window, we're comparing ourselves and comparing the market now to things that happened 4 years ago, and we live in a different world now. So
Exactly.
it's pretty tough to do.
Yes, it's not always accurate. I mean, predictions, forecasting
Right.
is not always the best thing to. You don't want to rely on that wholeheartedly.
Sure,
it can give you some hope, maybe, or some possible outlook. But yes, what you're saying is absolutely true. Pandemic messed up a lot of things. And so we're seeing some reverting back to pre-pandemic. But again, 2019 was actually not a good year for trucking.
Right.
For people who remember that. It was a really bad year. And so you had a lot of people who have come into the industry, a huge influx of carriers in 2020 and 2021 and the first little part of 2022 who have never experienced a freight cycle before. They've never seen the down. And so they got in when it was hot, and now things are difficult. And especially if they bought a used truck with those high prices they were the last couple of years, and now rates are low. I mean, if you own your own truck, that gives you a lot of flexibility to do some things. But if you don't, that's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like so many of people out there are getting kind of smacked in the face with all of this, and it's a prolonged smacking of the face that seems to be happening with that. And you had some good advice there, I think. And we always talk about this because you've, again, seen all the numbers. You've seen every number that's ever been out there, and you look through these things historically. Advice to people out there who are feeling the wrath of the storm right now, who are in the middle of it, not quite sure what to do. I mean, what would you say to those people and how to get to the other side of this thing?
Well, what we tend to suggest is that people build direct relationships with shippers, or even in a sense, you could use brokers. Maybe a time like this, someone who's trusted. Obviously, there's a lot of bad or fraudulent brokers out there, but building that contractual type of relationship can kind of ease the pain. If you are relying solely on load boards, this is the time when that's really a bad idea. It's kind of a race to the bottom, unfortunately. Someone's always going to take one of those lower paying loads, even though it hurts everybody. And everyone knows that, but yet it still happens.
Yeah.
And so if you have a relationship with the shipper, you can protect and shield yourself somewhat from the dynamics of the freight market. And really, that is your best bet, because there's still a way to earn money even in a bad market like this. You look at someone like Louis Pugh, who is our executive vice president. He was trucking for 20 years. He saw all kinds of different up cycles and down cycles, but he was successful. He earned as far as his average per mile goes over those years was, outstanding. He knew how to make money. He knew how to shift, how to keep your ear out for other prospects or opportunities, and to be able to transition from one operation model to another if you need to. And that is always the benefit of being an owner-operator. You can be flexible, whereas others cannot. And, right now also, even though people might hate it, but switching to something like leasing onto a larger carrier who has that freight that would be somewhat insulated from spot market prices could be helpful.
Andrew, good advice as always. Helpful information, obviously, during these tough times, and we appreciate you coming by as always.
Thank you.
That was Andrew King of the OOIDA Foundation, and Landline Now is back right after this.
Today's rising costs affect everyone. Replace your harmonic damper with a genuine Vibertech TVD viscous damper to prevent costly repairs and downtime. Keep your money in your pocket and your truck on the road with Vibertech TVD. Recommended replacement at 500,000 miles or 15,000 hours. Firestone tires are for more of everything. More miles for every tire dollar, and more confidence in your fleet. At Firestone, we help fleets save with dependable value. Find your local Firestone dealer today at firestonetire.com/dealer.
Congress has said no to a new emission rule for large trucks from the Environmental Protection Agency. So what happens now? Welcome back to Landline Now. This is Regulatory Roundup, and I'm Mark Reddig. I'm joined as always by OOIDA Director of Federal Affairs, Jay Grimes. Jay, how are you doing?
Doing well, Mark. Great to be back.
Well, great to have you with us. Let's kind of start by going back a little bit to this EPA rule. I'm wondering if you can just kind of spell it out for us, what essentially this thing required.
Yeah, this was a rule that was proposed and finalized last year, really requiring more stringent emissions on nitrous oxide emissions from heavy-duty trucks. And I think very restrictive, excessive levels that they were going to put in place, and a rush timeline beginning in model year 2027. And we raised concerns about the rule that, on one, the cost of the emissions equipment would really make it harder for small business truckers to afford. And then the reliability of this emissions equipment is a tough sell. When you look at past emissions rulemakings from EPA, and that results in a lot of downtime, a lot of breakdowns for the new trucks, that when you have these hurried timelines, the trucks aren't where they need to be. And again, involves a lot of money to get them replaced. The maintenance on them isn't as easy as some of the older trucks. And basically the bottom line is, we think that if you implement this final rule before it's ready, a lot of drivers, a lot of motor carriers are going to hold on to their older trucks because they have a lot of concerns about the affordability and reliability of the trucks coming in 2027. That's going to not have the fleet turnover that EPA wants to see, and that's not going to result in improved emissions and air quality across the board. And we thought there were a number of improvements that EPA could have made. For the most part, they neglected to incorporate any of those in the final rule, and the NOx emissions rule was finalized in December of 2022.
So we have a resolution in Congress now. What kind of a resolution was this action by Congress? I'm wondering if you can explain what it was and how it works.
Right. So there is an action Congress can take called the Congressional Review Act, which gives the legislative branch kind of a check and balance on the executive branch to overturn problematic and significant rulemakings that they find that the executive branch may have overstepped their limits in jurisdiction. And this was one that Congress felt, was too excessive. And earlier this year, the Senate, led by Nebraska Senator Deb Fischer, introduced a Congressional Review Act resolution. They passed that 50-49. And then now this week, the House of Representatives introduced and passed their own resolution led by Congressman Troy Nehls of Texas that passed by similar margins, a slim majority. And the Congressional Review Act has been enacted for now. Now, given our Constitution and the federal laws here, the president has an opportunity to veto the Congressional Review Act that has now been passed in both the House and the Senate. The administration has indicated they would do so, and the clock is running now. They have 10 days since Tuesday afternoon here to administer and sign off on the veto. Would then go back over on the congressional side, where you would need a 2/3 vote to overturn the presidential veto. Given the numbers on the previous votes, unlikely that Congress has the sufficient 2/3 majority vote, but we'll kind of wait and see how quickly and if and when the president issues a veto on this latest Congressional Review Act.
I want to go back a little bit here. You mentioned some of the concerns that people had with the EPA rule. There was a statement by Todd Spencer of OOIDA. Can you give us just an example of some of the things that Todd Spencer said?
Yeah, truckers care about clean air as much as anyone else. But, truckers are also on the front lines of the supply chain. We've got over 70% of America's freight relying exclusively on trucking, and mandating equipment that has historically led to really major reliability issues under an unrealistic timeline. It's going to have devastating effects on the reliability of the supply chain and ultimately on the cost and availability of consumer goods. And I think Todd's quote was echoed by the members of Congress who spoke on the House floor this week in support of the resolution to overturn this NOx emissions rule. We heard from quite a few members of Congress about the costs and reliabilities and the effect that would have on the supply chain, and really that the increased costs on the vehicles would get passed down to the consumers. And that also is going to create some more problems when you talk about inflation these days and affordability across the board. So I think a lot of the opposition that we have told EPA about over the last year or so now, Congress heard that message and put that into action with approving this Congressional Review Act.
As you mentioned, the president is likely to veto it. Congress doesn't have the two-thirds majority to override. But what is the practical effect in the long term of this resolution having been passed by Congress? Does it send a message to EPA? What does it do?
Yeah, without question, I think it really puts a spotlight on how harmful these EPA emissions rulemakings can be, especially on the small business trucking side. And I think when the president vetoes this Congressional Review Act, that's going to draw quite a bit of headlines. I think it's only going to be his third veto of his administration. Then it's going to go back. You're going to have another vote in the House and Senate. And that's going to continue to kind of get the word out. And that's especially critical because we've got another EPA proposal that's just come out within the last month, putting more emission standards on greenhouse gases and putting in really manufacturing production's incentives and in a lot of cases mandates on electric vehicles, which we know are not ready in any way for the long-haul trucking sector. So yes, I think it really spotlights and emphasizes a lot of concerns with EPA emissions rulemakings and can hopefully prevent any other further bad rules from going into effect.
Well, let's go on to another topic and another federal agency, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, which is calling a meeting of its Underride Advisory Committee. Let's start kind of broadly here, Jay. What is this committee and what is its mandate?
Right. So the last major highway bill, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that was enacted in November of 2021, had a provision here looking at this underride issue for commercial trucks and had a couple of different provisions. One, strengthening rear underride guards, which has now gone into effect, something that research and data, highway safety statistics kind of back up and that we've supported. There were some other provisions doing more research on a potential side underride mandate, which OOIDA has expressed numerous concerns about, whether it's cost benefit, where you have costs exceeding any safety benefits that have been put out there by NHTSA, also operational concerns. And we've seen an advance notice of proposed rulemaking with some latest research from NHTSA on the side underrides equipment. That comment period is underway and is open until mid-June. And another provision was setting up this advisory committee on underride protection, which will make recommendations to the Secretary of Transportation on safety regulations related to underride crashes that have caused severe injury and fatalities. So that committee has been formed. It's made up of 16 total individuals representing different aspects of the trucking industry, the manufacturing industry, safety groups, labor groups. And they're kicking off their meetings today. The first meeting is going to take place today, and will be a year or two long process to develop some recommendations to DOT on underride regulations.
I wonder if you could offer just a little bit of history of this issue on Capitol Hill, because it has been discussed there with some degree of extensively. What sort of efforts have been made in Congress on this?
We've seen efforts to mandate not only the rear underride standards and rear underride equipment, but also side underrides and front underrides. And when it comes to rear underride equipment, we've seen the investment is necessary. It has proven safety benefits. When you look at the research that's been done, we can't say the same for side underrides and front underrides. And I think that the latest NHTSA estimate to mandate that equipment would be like $1.2 billion across the trucking industry. Really mind-blowing numbers. We've seen legislation introduced over the past few years to mandate side and front underrides. That legislation has not advanced beyond introduction. OOIDA has been adamantly opposed to that legislation. And when you look at the latest data that NHTSA put out just about a month or so ago, they still find that the costs of the equipment exceeds any safety benefits by 600 to 800%. And the latest cost safety analysis didn't even include some of the operational costs in implementing the side underride equipment on trailers. So really, we think the research continues to show that the costs are just too much for drivers and motor carriers to have this as a mandate. And this is going to be one of the issues that the advisory committee on underride protection is going to be taking a look at. And it's going to probably be one of the main questions, along with some other, how research can be better done on some of this equipment, if there's any other improvements that can be done on the rear underride standard as well. So really looking forward to see, the debate of this committee and kind of what recommendations they come up with. But at the same time, I know one of the OOIDA board members is going to be serving on this committee, and he's really going to be making the case that a mandate is not necessary for this equipment.
We've got just a little bit of time left, Jay, and I did want to get to one other topic if we can get just a little bit in on it. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration is working on the broker transparency issue very intently, they say, and plans to start rulemaking soon. Do we know what soon is?
Not quite exactly. We heard in March that after a few years of review, FMCSA would soon be publishing a rulemaking regarding broker transparency. FMCSA Administrator Robin Hutchinson has said they're working on the issue very intently and will be sharing more information about our rulemaking agenda come this spring. So still kind of in that holding pattern on broker transparency and potentially speed limiters as well. We heard that could see the next phase of a speed limiter mandate rulemaking as soon as June, but now Administrator Hutchinson has said going to be more like a late summer or early fall there.
Okay. Well, Jay, that's all the time we have, but thank you very much for all the information.
Okay. Thank you, Mark.
I've been talking with OOIDA Director of Federal Affairs, Jay Grimes. And folks, as these issues come up and you have a chance to make comments on them, we provide a place for you to make those comments. That place is at fightingfortruckers.com. That's also where you can learn about legislation affecting the trucking industry and all sorts of other pieces of information, including contact information for your individual lawmakers on the state and federal level. Again, that's at the website fightingfortruckers.com. We'll be back in just a moment. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Penske owns and operates some of the best-maintained vehicles on the planet. Our used trucks come with a 5-year maintenance report and pre-sale inspection. So if you're in the market for a top-quality pre-owned truck, look no further. Search our inventory today at PenskeUsedTrucks.com.
Attention all truckers, Dean Michael, the tax doctor here. I want to talk to you about those dreaded tax problems. I know you want to keep on trucking and not even think about them, but let's face it, they're not going away all on their own. You need professional help. I've been helping truckers put their tax problems in the rearview mirror for years. I can help you too. Call me now for a free consultation at 888-557-4020 or go to mytaxhelpmd.com. It's like I always say, keep your eyes on the road, I'll keep mine on the IRS. 888-557-4020.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Welcome back to Landline Now, and welcome to Keith Goebel of Landline Magazine, who joins us in Studio A right now for a look at a couple of stories he's been tracking. That's going to take us to Washington State and Utah today. Keith, you're looking well. Good to see you.
Scott, you always make it sound so pleasant to be talking with me. I appreciate that.
It always is pleasant, Keith.
I don't get that often.
I don't care what other people say about you. I enjoy talking to you and spending time with you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
So a round of applause here for the state of Washington. Right off the bat, lawmakers there passing a bill guaranteeing restroom access for truck drivers at shippers and consignees, and a round of applause for the governor there for signing this into law finally. And I shouldn't really say finally, because this thing moved pretty quickly through the legislature there. Government at its finest, I think.
Yeah, folks that have been listening to us talk about this topic here this year, probably, no surprise this has actually happened. It was just a matter of when, how soon it was going to happen, and yeah, it made its way to the governor's desk. This requirement for shippers and consignees to make restrooms available for truck drivers. What was it, a year ago? Of course, they kind of got the ball rolling on this by putting in the requirement at ports that drayage truckers have access. If they're inside the gate in the truck queuing lots, that they have access to restrooms, and that it's not just some little outhouse that's available. It's not off the actual port itself, the actual facilities that they could use. So making that available. But yeah, a year ago, OOIDA advocated for including shippers and receivers in this requirement statewide, not just limiting it to ports. But that was kind of opening the door on this issue a year ago there in Washington State, and the issue got brought back up earlier this year by Representative Eric Robertson, and it swept its way through the State House and signed into law by Governor Jay Inslee here in recent days. So yeah, as of July 23rd, there in Washington State, if you are a truck driver, if you are delivering to or are picking up from a load, you've got that assurance, and you will have that assurance in state law that you'll be able to use a facility that essentially it's defined as any facility that would be available for employees or the public.
Yeah. Novel concept.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And the question I have, and the thing I think we don't quite know yet, is how enforcement is going to look. We know that there will be fines, I believe, for establishments that do not provide restroom access to truck drivers who are dropping off or picking up. Do we know what it's going to look like specifically? Is this a complaint process? How is this all going to play out starting July 23rd there in Washington State?
Yeah, this is something that the Washington State Department of Health is responsible for in making sure that the rules followed, which, hey, that makes sense. Essentially, they will be relying on the truck drivers themselves to provide feedback. If a truck driver runs into a situation where they are denied access to a restroom, contacting the Department of Health there in Washington State, and the agency then sending a notification, or what they say a notice of correction, being sent to the affected location, and essentially if it happens again, that they would face fines, the fines of $125 for, again, a shipper or consignee that does not follow the rule. So, yes, it is. The state is looking to go the education route with these locations and relying on those truck drivers to provide them a heads up if somebody is not following the rule.
I know it happens because we hear about it all the time, but it still boggles the mind that you have these businesses out there that are denying access to a restroom for someone who is obviously doing business with them. It just boggles the mind. So again, kudos to Washington State for recognizing this issue and how ludicrous it is that they need to actually have a law for it, but putting it into law, for one. And number two, I hope that this is something that other states will take a look at and realize is an issue that they can easily, solve.
Yeah.
And we'll see what happens. But again, hats off to Washington State. I know you've been following this for a long time, and it's good to see something like this move through so quickly with bipartisan support and not a lot of fuss surrounding it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to believe that this is a topic that truck drivers have been bringing up across the country, probably for some time with lawmakers. But it's good to have precedent set, as often is the case, where now a constituent can go to their lawmaker and say, "This is what Washington State has done to address an obvious." Something that should say it's common sense. It seems obvious that it's something that should be. You wouldn't need to legislate it, but at the same time, for some, you need to legislate it.
Yeah.
And Washington State at least has taken that step to provide, the foundation for other states to look to again make sure that they're addressing just a basic need, which unfortunately we know common sense hardly ever seems to win the day anymore.
Not as common as it used to be, maybe.
We will blame social media, not radio here ourselves, right?
Of course not. No.
But but yes, it is definitely something that now, yes, I would have to believe we will continue to see more states kind of follow along.
And keep your eye on the federal level, too. Representative Troy Nehls of Texas introduced a bill last year that would essentially do what this Washington State bill did. He has not reintroduced that yet, but has said that he will reintroduce it here soon. So we could see some action on the federal level as well here in the weeks or months to come. So keep an eye out for that.
Well, and on all that, Pennsylvania is one of the states that last year brought up this legislation, like Washington State. We'll have to see how the rest of the year plays out there in Pennsylvania. But I would think for the most part, when we get to 2024, we're going to – there are still some states that are still in session at this point, but probably a little bit too late to start from scratch on this issue in some of those states. But I think that, once we get to 2024, you're probably going to have this be potentially one of the trending topics that we'll get to revisit.
We shall see. We'll check back here in 2024 with you, Keith, to see if your predictions hold true.
I hope to be here.
I hope you are too. Let's move on to Utah here, where the legislature held a special session recently to talk about transportation funding. Not necessarily a special session topic a lot of the time, but this one had a sense of urgency for a very particular reason, Keith.
Yeah, snow removal, concerns about flooding now as we're getting out of winter. Last season, the state of Utah spent double the amount of money that they had allotted for the task, and having to revisit that, in addition to extending the state of emergency that they've had to address the flooding continuing concerns that they do have there, landslides, avalanches, the problems that they've been having now with the melting of that snow, wanting to make sure that they have the money to address flooding as far as roadways there around the state and mudslides, and trying to make sure that the roads stay clear and safe. So, I had a special session that the governor called, a one-day special session to get that done, in which they have done. They've extended the state of emergency from the middle of May to the middle of August, and authorized again that funding so that they will continue to move forward with making sure that the roads are cleared.
For this year, right? And I guess next year they would have to take it up again?
Sure.
Right?
Yeah,
okay.
Probably during a regular session next year, but for this year they had to do it in a special session.
Gotcha. Keith, Always a pleasure. We'll see you next time and also in 2024.
Absolutely. We'll make the date.
There you go. And that's our show. Thanks for listening to Landline Now. We've got another one coming tomorrow, so join us if you can. Until next time, take care.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife,
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
My kids.
chrome, and I am a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us.
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.